I would love to get Louise Penny introduced. She's a longtime friend and favorite of mine and Murder by the Book. So we are so thrilled to be joined by you today, Louise. Louise Penny is the New York Times, #1 New York Times and Globe and Mail bestselling author of the Chief Inspector Armand Gamache novels. She has won numerous awards, including a CWA Dagger and the Agatha Award many times, and was a finalist for the Edgar Award for Best Novel. She is here today with us to discuss the latest in her series, All the Devils Are Here, which was just out yesterday. Yay! Hi, Louise. How are you?
I'm doing great. It's so great to be back in even virtually at Murder by the Book. As you said, it's a literary home for me. It was one of the first. I think it was it the first tour I did that I came to Murder by the Book, or the second? I think it might have been the second, because I don't think I went anywhere with Still Life.
I think you came for Fatal Grace, yes. I don't think that you were here for Still Life, but we were just reminiscing earlier that you were in Houston celebrating your first #1 New York Times bestseller. On the day it happened, we had a cake, so I feel like we're a little bit of a part of that.
A huge part of that. I remember so well. We were at Houston, in the hotel in Houston, Sarah and I, Melnick, we call her La Melnick, in the hotel, and we knew we were close, right? We knew we were close, and I'd been on the bestseller list, but I'd been moving up, but couldn't crack up to #1. It was so close, and we knew the call was coming in, so we went into what's supposed to be the quiet room, and the publisher, Andy, was on the phone, and he said, "You're #1." And Sarah and I started screaming, jumping up and down. And it's a good thing they didn't hose us down or throw us out or call the police. And then we came here to Murder by the Book. And you and John had arranged for a cake with #1 on it. Oh.
I might be misremembering, but I feel like I bought squirt icing and wrote #1 on it. But
where did you how old was that cake?
No, this cake was new. I don't know about the squirt icing. So we're here today to talk about a little bit of a departure for the series. As you can tell, I have Eiffel Towers on my dress. I have an Eiffel Tower behind me. We've got Eiffel Towers everywhere because Armand Gamache goes to Paris. Can you tell us a little bit about this book and what trouble he finds himself in this time?
Yeah, I can't tell you, as you know, I won't tell very much. I know a lot of the people who joined us are probably about to cover their ears for fear of a spoiler. And I promise you that there will be no spoiler, because I'm afraid of that too. When I went on tour in person, and at the end, I always obviously opened it up for questions, which was my favorite part. I love that. That I just waited for someone to ask, now, why did you make so-and-so the killer? Or why did, so I'm very sensitive to spoilers, but it was time in the book, in the series, for the development of the characters, for their progress forward. The last book ended with Jean-Guy and Annie moving to Paris. Daniel, Armand's son, and his grandchildren were already there. So it just seemed a natural thing for the characters to do, but it was also a natural thing for me. As a writer, I felt to take them out of Three Pines, take Armand out of his comfort zone and take me out of mine, and really challenge me as a writer, and it did.
You know, I think that for years, your books have kind of been about the family that we construct around ourselves. So the group in Three Pines, they might not be related, but they are a family, obviously. And this one is more about family in a literal sense, blood relatives. Obviously, Armand's godfather isn't related, but he's as much a part of family. However, it's about the children. It's about interpersonal relationships. Why did you choose to dive into a more insular story like that?
You know what I thought? Moving him out of Three Pines into Paris, this spectacular city, a world city and a world center, and the story itself, the plot line is big in terms of the consequences, in terms of what they discover is happening. It's huge. So I felt that what I wanted to do was to balance that off by having a huge plot line, but an extremely intimate, intuitive line of the personal of the characters. So I wanted the balance of the two, and so that's what we do. Is we go. It's a little bit like having I don't know, like a hurricane like this, and then a tornado like that.
Yeah.
So dig down into the origin stories of Armand. A little bit about his background, what he was like as a child with his godfather, his relationship with his son, and why it's so fraught. We finally find that out. So we learn a lot more about the Gamaches and the family. Reine Marie plays a much bigger role. Her skills as an archivist and librarian are vital in this story, and that was fun to do. So actually, in many ways, taking it away from Three Pines, when I write about Three Pines, which I choose to do and I love it, the challenge there is that there's so many series regulars. It takes up a lot of time to just reintroduce them, to develop them as well, and so there's less time for each individual. Whereas now, without those, I could really focus in on the Gamache family.
Yeah, absolutely. And it feels like also you've had some plot threads continuing for a while, and it feels like this one is a book that you can read any of them individually, but this one really feels like someone could just pick this book up, and you might not know all the backstory to the son and daughter, but it's about their family, and it's this case in Paris. So I'm sure it was kind of fun to just separate and focus on that.
You're right. And then that wasn't necessarily intentional in terms of, well, it's time to write a standalone. But that's what it ended up being, because it is a good entry point. But one of the challenges, again, is this is book 16. And I'm really hoping that with every book, we find new readers who haven't read the previous, in this case, 15 books. And I don't want it to feel like it's homework. Well, I got to go back 15 books in order to understand what's happening in this one. And as you said, it's more important than others. In this one, perhaps less so, because I have more chance to develop the core characters.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's, I'll get to Paris in a minute, but I love Paris. Again, I didn't buy all this Eiffel Tower stuff specifically for this.
Look at your earrings.
They're not Eiffel Towers. They're just...
They look Eiffel Tower-ish.
I was going for that, but I do have a lot of Eiffel Towers around the house. I spent my first honeymoon there, and then when we suddenly lost David and I didn't think I'd ever get married again, I took a trip with my now current husband, who was a boyfriend at the time. We went to Europe, and he proposed after dinner on the Eiffel Tower. So yeah, I love the city. I've been numerous times. Obviously, it holds special memories. And actually, I was going, we had an original plan. We had a very small wedding, just family. And then we were going to have a big party, which I don't know, that never happened. But this dress with Eiffel Towers was going to be my wedding party.
Can you stand up a bit? Because it's kind of hard to see. If you could show.
Oh, it's got Eiffel Towers all over it. and a full skirt. So it's a little bit of a party dress, but I had to wear it for this. So there's a scene, let's talk about Paris for a minute. Had you been to Paris? Did you have much experience with Paris before writing this book?
Well, I had been, you talk about going there with your first husband and then, so romantic, what a wonderful story, being proposed to at the Eiffel Tower. But the first time I went to Paris, and I was 36 and single. And I really thought, I'm never going to get to Paris, and I'm certainly never going to get to Paris with a lover. And then I met Michael, and within about 4 months of us meeting, he said, I've got a conference I have to go to in France. Do you want to come to Paris with me? Well, let me. Please. So off we went, and we had dinner. And then after dinner, the first night, he said, "Now I want to show you something. It's just over here." So I followed him, and he said, "Look at this tree." I mean, but now I was so in love that he could have said, look at this stone. It's the best stone ever. I love the stone. So he's pointing at the tree. I mean, I love the tree. It's a great tree. And he's got his finger on the bark, and I'm looking at the bark with my eyes crossed. And I'm following his finger as it's going along. And then he goes like that. And right in front of us is the Eiffel Tower, all lit up. Oh my God, I'll never forget that he knew how important this was. So this was a moment I would never forget, and I never have.
That's amazing. That's absolutely wonderful. You know, the city is just magical. I mean, obviously every city has their flaws too, but there's a reason it's the city of light. It's just magical. And I was so excited that this book was set in Paris. I'm a sucker, clearly, for Paris stories. You have a scene, actually, at my favorite place in Paris, the Rodin Museum. Where Armand is thinking about his childhood. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yes. I love, again, with Michael on that first trip, we went to the Rodin Museum, and I liked the museum itself. You know, frankly, once you see one museum, you know, Michael is looking at everything, and all I want to do is get to the gift shop and have a cappuccino. But so we went around the museum, and then we went into the garden, and the garden transcend. It's so peaceful, and you go along and you see the kiss, and you see the gates of hell, and you see all of these statues that you've seen photographs of all my life, and there it is, the original. And so I have a scene where it actually starts off with, and again, this is like the first paragraph. I'm not going to tell too much, but Armand and Stephen, his godfather, who essentially raised him after Armand's parents were killed, and would bring him to Paris once a year. So from the age of 8 or 9, Armand got to see Paris and got to love it and got to know it, but particularly loved the Musée Rodin, the garden. And they're sitting in front of the gates of hell, which is monumental, of course, and horrific. And that's where Stephen utters the line, hell is empty, Armand, and all the devils are here. And that sort of sets the tone for the thing. But just down the way is Armand's favorite, and not coincidentally my favorite statue, which is the Burgess of Calais. And that plays into the ongoing theme of probably the entire series, but certainly of this book, that there is no courage without fear. That the most heroic people are the ones who are terrified, but they do it anyway. And that becomes a leitmotif through this as the terror level rises, as the darkness closes in on the family.
Well, and you know, I think throughout your series, one of the reasons that people love your characters so much is that they experience that. They experience fear, and that they rise above it, and they do what needs to be done. They get past it. It's not, none of them are superhuman. They don't just run into a burning building and not think about it. They very much feel the impacts of the situations that they're in. And so it makes sense you saying that about that statue. I hadn't put it together, but it totally makes sense. And by the way, the gardens, I mean, like you said, it just unbelievable. If anyone watching goes to Paris, you could very easily overlook the Rodin Museum, but I don't make a trip there without going. It is so beautiful.
In fact, the whole idea, and again, this was intentional. I ended up going to Paris twice to research it. And the first time I went with some friends who knew Paris well. It was the first time I'd been back since Michael had died, and I was a little bit worried about, you know, the emotional impact. But I went with good friends, and they loved Paris, and it was a lot of fun. But they knew Paris very, very well, including one in particular. And so I said, I want to find gardens, because again, that whole sense of good and evil, of light and dark, and where else, as Armand uses in the first chapter, are you likely to find the devil but in a garden? And so that also becomes, there's a series of gardens, hidden gardens that exist, but you wouldn't necessarily know about through the whole thing. And the story begins in a garden, and it essentially ends in a garden, and not the same garden.
So you've actually led into what was going to be my next question. If you had friends who gave you a tour around the city, or insiders.
Yes. I have friends who I live next to in Knowlton in Quebec, and there's obviously a real connection between France and Quebec. And so a lot of people in Quebec are very familiar with Paris. So a good friend, Guy, and I, who's a neighbor, went, and then we invited Kirk and Walter to come with us. And so we rented a house in the Marais. And the challenge is, I understood, obviously, because I did it on purpose, that one of the attractions of Three Pines is the sense of community, of belonging. And my fear was leaving that, we would lose a big character in the stories, and that's community, that yearning to belong. So I needed to recreate that to a degree in Paris, and I couldn't capture all of Paris. The city's immense and it's magnificent. It would be folly to try. So I had to choose two arrondissements to focus on, and one is the Marais, and the other is Saint-Germain-des-Prés, which are two quite famous arrondissements with thankfully, a lot of stuff happening.
We the Marais is where I rented an apartment for my first honeymoon, and it's amazing. It feels so just a world of its own with the cobblestone streets, and having been the old Jewish quarter, it was a great move because it does feel like its own little city in Paris. And same thing with Saint-Germain, like completely different feel, but you're not in areas have plenty of tourists, but you're not over by the Louvre with indescribable massive things. It does feel like a city, a little town, I should say.
Yes. Yeah.
So John, as I mentioned, who is the event coordinator at Murder by the Book and also a huge fan, had a question for me to pass along to you earlier, which I think is a great question. So you obviously have a lot of experience dealing with the Quebecois French people. Did you notice a difference culturally or any differences between Parisian French and Canadian French?
Well, linguistically, yes, for sure. Interestingly enough, when Michael and I first went, and we would speak French because we speak French, we speak Quebecois French, and we were mocked mercilessly, which did not feel good. That's not necessary.
No.
And especially since we're actually speaking a language, it's not like it's a bastardized French. It is actually, it's not bad French, it's good Quebecois.
Right.
So, that didn't feel so good. This time around, nobody corrected us, nobody mocked. I don't know whether the world, because of social media, has become smaller and in some ways more judgmental, but in other ways more knowledgeable and more accepting. So that was nice. But in this book, because there clearly is a bit of a schism between, the French think that they're up here and the Quebecois are sort of are adorable but slightly slow children. And so that's also a running joke through this whole thing, is how they treat, particularly Jean-Guy, who's, he's covered in prickles. So it's fun to see him react every time.
Yeah. So I think that we have covered Paris in this book. I have some questions about writing and the series as a whole. So first off, your writing is so poetic and poetry inspired. Where did that love of poetry come from, and who are some of your favorite poets?
I don't think I've ever been asked that. I've been asked about my favorite poets. I've been asked about why poetry, but I don't think anyone has ever asked, where did it come from? I had a grandfather, as most of us do, and I adored him. And he was my mother's father. And when I was a child, he would take us, but mostly me, out into parks and gardens, and he'd hold my hand and we'd walk. And he was British by birth, but living in Canada. And he loved the British poets and had memorized a lot of it. So as we walked, he would simply, instead of just talking, he would spout poetry. He would recite poetry for an hour at a time. And then little by little, I started memorizing it. And so that's where I learned the love of poetry, not because it was thrust down my throat or had to study it or had to memorize it. I didn't. I just adored him, and anything he loved, I loved. And then it grew from there.
That's a lovely story. I'm glad I asked that. So I know that several of the people who've watching have probably already heard you answer this question before, but I find it fascinating. So you decide to come to writing books a little bit later in life. Do you want to talk about kind of that decision and maybe any struggles you had getting that first book out?
Oh, who has insight knowledge? No, there was no struggle at all. It was the easiest thing in the world. Yeah, I wanted to write since I was a child. I was not a bright child, I have to admit. I worked hard at school. I really, really worked, and I was lucky to get 60s. I just sort of scraped by. I don't know what it was. I'm and the shame of it is that I grew up thinking I was stupid, which clearly it took a long time to undo that kind of core belief. But what I did know was that I loved reading, and I wanted to be a writer. But I was afraid. I was a very fearful child, period. But I was certainly afraid to try my hand at writing or to tell anyone that that was my dream. So I took an ancillary route, and I ended up as a journalist with the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, which was close. It was close. It was not quite there. It was like skimming across being an author. And finally, I just hit a wall. I just hit a wall. I was 35. I was drinking. I was unhappy. And something just had to change. And one of the big changes was I managed, through the grace of God, to get sober. And then I met Michael, and all sorts of the world opened up. And then I was burned out in my career. I'd covered Quebec politics, and it's very intertwined and labyrinthian, and it's just very difficult. Although I am slightly embarrassed to admit to a mostly American audience that Canadian politics brought me to my knees.
Oh, you would have to be made of sterner stuff here.
Yeah, exactly. I know. I came home one day and Michael said, if you want to quit work to write that book, I'll support you, which was such a beautiful thing to say. And he meant it. And from that day onward, never did he ever doubt. Even though I suffered 5 years of writer's block, as did Michael, suffered my 5 years of writer's block. But he never, ever questioned. He never said, maybe you should go back to work. Maybe this isn't for you. Nothing of that sort. And finally I did. And if anyone is interested, I can tell you how that writer's block broke. But I ended up writing Still Life. And then nobody wanted it. I sent it out everywhere. This was before the online submissions. The internet existed. This was in 2003, 4, 5. But nobody wanted it. Nobody could, it was a small, intimate crime novel set in a little village in Canada. It did not have New York Times bestseller written all over it. So nobody believed in it. Nobody could quite get it. But I think, thankfully, I persevered and ended up entering. And if there are any emerging writers listening, and I suspect that there are, I hope there are, I really encourage you to enter contests, because it's a great way. Don't enter contests that you have to pay for, but there are a lot of free contests, like the Mystery Writers of America, like Malice Domestic, all sorts of contests for crime writers. And this was the Crime Writers Association in Great Britain had a best first novel contest, and I didn't win, but I ended up coming second, and that changed everything.
And I read a story about a serendipitous moment and a blue scarf.
Ah, yes. Well, I went to, because I'd been trying to get an agent, obviously, for years. Nobody was interested. And then I got shortlisted for this award. So Michael and I came over to London. I'm in London right now. came over to London for the awards ceremony. And I knew that the prize might be to win, but actually the prize was to be in the room, the same room, for an hour and a half with all the people whose attention I had spent 2 years trying to get. So I didn't want to end up speaking to, a waiter by mistake, thinking he was an agent. So I went around. This is where being a journalist helped. And that's saying, fail to prepare, prepare to fail. So I'm a big believer in preparation. So I went to the major booksellers in London and said, who are the top agents in crime fiction? And they gave me a list, and it winnowed down to 3. And Michael and I went to the awards ceremony, and the first one wasn't there. The second one just wasn't interested in speaking to me. And the third one was drunk. So, and then I lost. So it was not my finest. And then, so I went back to the hotel or to the room we had rented, and I just curled into a little ball. And 3 days later, Michael said, look, we've been invited to a party. You have to get out of bed. Let me scrape the gunk off of you, and off we go. And this was the sale of goods. It was around Christmas time, and it's the sort of thing that you hear about here in London sometimes, not so much elsewhere, in my experience. It was in a house party, and she was having 3 days of it, and she'd invite all of her friends and friends of friends and sell things that people can buy and give as gifts. Most of them are fundraisers. This was for a woman's co-op in Afghanistan. So I didn't want to go, but Michael forced me, and off we went. And there was this table with pashminas, and it was a beautiful blue pashmina. And I reached for it, and there was this claw that reached for it at the same time. So now she and I are like playing tug of war with this pashmina, but we're both, Anglos, and we're a little anal. So like pretending like it's not happening. Like, there's nice weather. Finally, she said, who are you? I said, Louise Penny, like that should matter. And she said the most extraordinary thing. She said, I have your name on a Post-it note on my computer. I said, well, who are you? She gave me her name, and that was the first name on the list. The agent who wasn't there. The only person in all of London I had to meet was at that party. And there must have been 100 people in that room, one person I spoke to.
That's incredible.
I let go.
Incredible. You let go of this scarf?
I may have even bought it for her. I think it's possible. I might have bought her a car. I don't know. Given her.
That's so funny. Well, I think we can see that Michael has had a hand in the books more ways than one. I normally ask authors in which ways do they find themselves in their characters, but would you like to talk about Michael and how he was part of Gamache?
That's a lovely thing for you to ask. Thank you. Yes, well, when I came time to create Gamache, I'd heard that Christie had grown tired of Poirot, and I think there are a number of reasons, but I didn't want that to happen. If I was lucky enough to get published and it become a series as I wanted it, I didn't want that to happen. So I thought, well, the best way maybe is to create a fictional character I would marry. So that's what I did. I gave Gamache all the qualities of a man I admire and respect and could love and would want to spend the rest of my life with. And I was feeling pretty proud of myself. When I came down to breakfast one day, and Michael was across the table, and he was talking about world peace or something like that. I thought, oh damn, I didn't create him. I transcribed him. Michael was the head of hematology at the Montreal Children's Hospital. So he was the doctor you don't want to meet ever, because it was children with cancer. It was devastating. And he had the worst job ever. And he would come home, and he'd held the hands of desperately ill children through the night, and he had to tell parents things no parent should ever have to hear. But he was the happiest man I ever knew. And that's not because dying children gave him pleasure. Clearly it was devastating, it was shattering. Yeah. But he understood what a gift life is. That these children don't get to live. So what a betrayal of these young lives it would be if those of us who have gray in our hair don't live life to the fullest, don't appreciate it, aren't filled with gratitude, aren't filled with joy. So I learned that from Michael. And that's a cardinal quality for Gamache, that he is a happy man and a content man, not despite what he sees, but because of what he sees every day, and making that choice every day to focus on the light and not the darkness. And it's so easy to slip into the darkness in this day and age, in any age. And that's, again, part of what we were talking about with Paris, the city of light, but there's also darkness right up against the light.
So how do you think Gamache would be during this pandemic? What would he be doing?
Well, he would be out, he would be one of the frontline workers, for sure. He would wear a mask. He would listen to the medical people. He would follow the rules, for sure. He would enforce the rules in a kindly way, I know, but firmly. Yeah, he would make sure that people understood that this is not just about your safety, it's the safety of others as well. That we have a social responsibility to each other. And we can be selfish, we can be tired, we all understand that, but for God's sake, suck it up.
Fair enough, so that we can get through this as soon as possible. Now, how are you doing in the pandemic? You said you're in London right now. Are you writing?
I am. Yep.
Yay!
I'm coming to the end of the first draft of the next book, but the first draft is like a dog's breakfast, right? I mean, it's just awful. It's awful. It's big and blah, blah. It's unrecognizable as a book, but the elements are there. I know the elements are there. Even yesterday I was writing and something came to me and I made a note of it that I think is going to end up being a major theme through the thing. And I'm almost at the end and it comes to me at the end. So when I go back and start the second draft, now I have a much keener sense of the themes of the books, the big themes, the overarching themes, but also the smaller ones that go through it. Never mind the plot, of course. So yeah, and I arrived in London on Sunday morning. My good friend Rocky Gottlieb is here and her husband Steve, and they're in the same building with me. So that's fun. It's important to have good friends.
Absolutely. And are you a morning writer? You get up and write in the morning? What does your day look like when you're in a book?
Yes, I get up every morning. I am very much a morning person. But if I don't have anything, see, I'm in quarantine right now, and so I can't leave the apartment, or shouldn't. So I in many ways that simplifies life for me because I don't have commitments. So normally I would set my alarm for 6 o'clock and get up, make a coffee and get right to work. But here I don't set my alarm because if I get to work at 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 even, I just write till I have nothing more to say. I generally set a word count for myself, at least early on in the draft, because I find that the more self-awareness you have, probably in any job, the easier it gets. You then adapt yourself to your strengths and recognize the weaknesses. And one of my strengths and things, and oddly enough, is actually a weakness, is I am extremely lazy. Yeah, that's one of my strengths, laziness. No, I once took a personality test, and what's your cardinal quality? Is it kindness? Is it generosity? Are you loving? It turns out my principal quality is sloth.
Well, I think that all the books you've put out definitely somehow that's working for you, because
what it does? Do you know what it does? Is it forces me to learn to be extremely disciplined, and I am, because I understand if I'm not disciplined, nothing happens.
Yep.
I don't want to reach the end of my days never having done the one thing that gives me pleasure because I'm too lazy or I'm too afraid, or all those qualities that are over here, that can end up being a thief.
Right.
You can feel what you actually want. And I could justify it. We all justify things. But, finally, it's like cheating at solitaire. You either learn discipline or you learn to live without your dreams. So that's what I do. I set a word count for myself. I'm very goal oriented, especially at first. Now that I'm at an end, I don't need the word count anymore. I can see the barn.
So I think you just said something that we'll all be happy to know, which is that this still gives you pleasure. You're still in it, love writing. We should keep getting books for some time.
Yes. Oh,
Excellent.
Yeah. People often ask, understandably, because we're so far into the series. I'm writing book 17 now, whether, I'd ever give up, whether I would, kill off Armand or just move to another series, or this still gives me just immense pleasure to write and to be with these characters. And it gives me the scope to explore all the themes that interest me. And that's how the books, as you know, you run a crime bookstore, that one of the dangers is becoming formulaic.
Sure.
And I don't want to do that. I don't think most writers want to do that. So one way to avoid it, even though I have essentially the same characters and same setting, is to explore different themes. And one of the themes in this book is that our lives are defined by our perceptions. And our perceptions are defined by the choices we make. There's also a theme of memory. That clearly we are the compilation of what we remember, of our experiences. But it's not simply our experiences, it's not simply what we remember, it's how we remember things. And that becomes a theme through the thing as different family members remember different events in various ways.
Sure. Memory is not fact.
Yes.
So that's certainly true. So I think, although, no, she has come up in the questions already. She always comes up in the questions. Let's talk about Ruth. Where did Ruth come from?
Ruth was relatively early on, I guess. Before I'd started writing, I made a list of the characters because I didn't think I'd be published. So I thought the only pleasure I was going to get was in the writing of it. So I needed to love the process because that would be the only reward I will probably ever get. So I created characters I would choose as friends. Now I recognize that one of the dangers in that is that everybody's nice. And while it's kind of fun for me to spend 2 years around nice people, it doesn't necessarily make for great reading.
Right.
So I needed the dissenting voice. I needed the Greek chorus. And so I created Ruth. Ruth is based on two people I know, neither of whom see it.
Of course not.
But I also didn't want her just to be an ornery old woman. That's not only is it overdone, it's just not fair and it's not right and it's not interesting. So I wanted her to have some depth. And part of that depth is that she has remarkable insight into others and into herself that she often hides, but it comes out in her poetry. So I wanted to bring that element of the poetry that I love in. Now the challenge, of course, is not to overdo it, because people reading crime novels don't necessarily want to also be reading a poetry book.
Yes, but I think that that's the reason people love your book so much, is because there is that balance there and there's more to it. And so that's why we feel like we know your characters. We know Ruth through your poetry, like you said. We also know Ruth through another character that I'm very concerned about. Have you researched the life expectancy of ducks?
I don't want to know. But you might have noticed that while some characters are aging, some characters are not.
Okay.
For instance, Armand is essentially the same age now as he was 16 years ago. And, but the thing is that, while the books come out every year, they're actually describing crimes that happen, three or four of those crimes happen every year in the characters' lives. So that's what I'm sticking to.
So Rosa's okay.
Rosa will outlive all of them. She'll be the one turning out the lights.
Great to know.
Maybe the mass murderer at the end.
So again, we've mentioned how you've got characters, you know and love them. Do you just have them fully formed in your head and you know them, or do you have a journal or cheat sheets as to what's happened to them over the years?
Well, that's an interesting question. Louise, my assistant and great friend, a number of years ago, I asked her to write what's known as the Bible. So to go through the books and to write the main characters and even major secondary characters and their age and what they look like and events and the major events, which she did brilliantly. But now we've gone so far into it. I should have asked her to keep updating it, but I forgot. So now, so now we're 16. Please, we're 16 in. You mind? But I've made some big boo-boos. I know that. I know, some of the characters' eyes are blue in one book and they're green in the next. And in one book they're 45, and the next book they're 35. And it's never that quite disastrous, but there are some inconsistencies that creep in, and readers never fail to let me know what they are.
I'm sure that's true. Do you dream about your characters?
Sometimes, mostly about Armand. Yeah. Yeah. But, yeah.
Interesting. So, I think that, you know what, I'm going to do this one more question because I like it, and then we'll get to audience questions. So P.D. James once said that there were only 4 motives for murder: love, lust, loathing, or lucre. Do you have a favorite motive?
I think she just liked alliteration, don't you?
I think you're right.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, I think fear. I think fear. I think that is the only motivation. You're afraid of losing something you have or not getting something that you want. And I think fear turns to hate, and hate turns to a terrible act.
Yeah, great. So a little bit of housekeeping before we move on to the audience questions. So all of you who ordered a copy of the book so that you could participate in this event will be getting the 3 Pines luggage tag. And we have called all of the in-store pickup customers. I was on the phone all day yesterday doing that. And about 90% of the mail orders have gone out. We had hundreds of books to ship out. We've been working tirelessly on that. So you should be getting tracking information. Bear in mind that the Postal Service, if you chose media mail as your shipping, the Postal Service is a little bit overwhelmed right now, so it may take a little longer than normal. We can't control that, but you will have your tracking information, and give it a few days and you should have your book. We've gotten them out as quick as humanly possible. Also, if you have joined us late or you'd like to rewatch this video, we will get it uploaded to YouTube as a private link later this afternoon, and we'll send an email out to everyone who are ticket holders so that you can watch the video from the beginning or again at your leisure, whatever you'd like. And then after a while, we'll make it public, but it's just for the ticket holders for now. So we do have some questions. Let's see. Dana asks, who has been the most influential to you in terms of your life philosophy?
Oh. Huh. I mean, Michael certainly had a huge impact, as you could tell. I mean, not simply on the character of Gamache, but on, how to be gracious, how to be strong, how to meet adversity. So yeah, I would say probably Michael. My grandfather was a huge influence as well. My mother was too. In a strange way, we had a bit of a fraught relationship, as I think mothers and daughters often do. But she went back to work, had to go back to work. We went from being fairly affluent to having nothing, and she went back to work in her 50s, and as a temporary in an office. And with her first paycheck, she brought it home, and we were all excited. We thought something other than Kraft dinner. And she said, "No, come on, get on the bus with me." So we got on a bus, and she took us downtown to the place essentially where she worked. But we walked from the bus stop in the direction of where she was working. and she passed an art gallery every day. And she said she went into the art gallery with us with her check, and she bought a painting that she had looked at every day as she went by. And she said, you must remember this, that it is important to have beauty in your life. It is as important as food, which we did not believe at the time. But when she died, that was the first thing, and we took turns, my brothers and I, to pick items. And the first thing I chose was that painting. It's a Madonna. It's a stylized Madonna.
Well, that's beautiful. That's a wonderful story. And I can see that in you and your writing. So great answer. So Carol asks if you have ever made a major plot change very late in the writing process.
Yes. Well, I mean, a plot in terms of who did it and who died, and probably not, but in terms of themes, yes. As I said, I just realized that one theme that I had unintentionally really been writing about, but I hadn't recognized. I suddenly recognized yesterday morning, so I wrote that down. So that will become a major, although I'm hoping subtle, element. What I decided to do with one of the books, for the life of me now, I can't remember what it was I wrote the book with one character in mind as the murderer, but I knew I was going to change it. I didn't know who I was going to change it to, but I thought that would be interesting because anyone reader is going to think if they guess, they're going to guess this person, and that's actually not the person. So that's when I got to the end, I switched it, and then of course had to go back and put in some subtle clues about who the real murderer was.
So you wrote yourself a red herring and then changed it. Changed it at the end.
Myself.
Debbie would like to know if Ruth's poetry is original.
No, it's not. No, I wish I could write poetry. I have immense admiration for people and respect for people who can, emerging writers, if they ask for advice, and often if they don't, I still tell them, read poetry. And I don't care whether they do or not. I don't care if it's Winnie the Pooh or a greeting card or Auden, who happens to be my favorite. But a great poet, it's about emotions. And great books are about emotions. They're not about murders. They're about emotions.
Sure.
So they manage to render down in a line or two such feelings. And I think it's a great classroom to read poetry. So the poetry that is ascribed to Ruth is, most of it is Margaret Atwood, actually.
Oh.
Yeah. If you read the permissions page at the very beginning, you'll see that it's listed.
Yeah, great. Joan would like to know another writing process question. How many drafts do you go through for each book?
It depends on the book. Never less than 3. Generally 4, sometimes 5. By the time I get to the 4th or 5th, it's very much fine-tuning. But you get to the point where every word counts. You know, it's 125,000 words in a book, but I'm focusing on every single word. It should be not that word, but another word that is more evocative. And that's the level. And that's often where the grace notes come in, or those moments of, because I don't have to focus on character. I don't have to focus on the big plot. That's already done. Now I can focus on the polishing, on the fine tuning. And that's a turn of phrase. And that's such a pleasure. And only then, after I've gotten it to that stage, after the 4th or 5th draft, up until then, nobody has read it. Only then do I give it generally to Louise, and then, to others to read at that point.
But those nuances come later in.
Generally, sometimes, in the first draft or second, some does, but that's really what I try to do in the first draft is get the major themes, the major characters down, the plot down, how it's solved, how the order of unveiling. But it's really very bold strokes. And the second draft is about clarifying, winnowing it down, getting out the superfluous. The third draft tends to be more about pacing. So the second draft is about structure, and the third draft is about pacing. And then the fourth and fifth is fine tuning.
Is that first draft essentially kind of your outline, or do you just write the books, or essentially outline or no outline?
Not a formal outline, but an idea in my mind, obviously, who did it, what the major themes are that I want to explore, but without having a stranglehold on it, being willing to go down a different route if it presents itself. But yeah, generally I know who did it and why. And
do you ever find yourself in a moment where you have writer's block and you have to backtrack, or do you kind of know where it's going?
Yeah, sometimes. And that's awful. That's a terrible feeling to reach the end of the writing of the day and realize I don't know where I'm going to go tomorrow. I know how the book ends, but I'm like, 100 pages into a 300-page manuscript. I don't know how I'm going to get from here to there. But something again always presents it. Sometimes you just write, it's awful, it's not going to be in the final draft, but I just keep writing, create a word bridge from I don't know to now I know. But the bridge will have to come out eventually.
Fair enough. We have a funny question. What is the significance of the rubber duck on your mantle?
Oh,
behind you.
The eyes, I know. Well, that's Rosa.
Okay.
And Rosa, we actually did it. I said to Louise, you know what we should do? That's as a fundraiser I try to raise money for dementia care. And so we thought, well, we do a Rosa duck, and we had printed on it what Rosa said that rhymes with duck. And so this has that written on it, except not the full word. It's just F-K, F 3 times. And we were going to sell it. And then, frankly, we just thought, who needs more rubber and plastic in this world? The last thing we need, my generation's already done enough damage. We don't need more. So I think we had 10 of them made as prototypes. And so that's one of them.
Well, that's pretty funny. So Kathy would like to know if there's any chance that series Bible that Lee wrote could be released as a companion book, or if there's a companion book planned.
Well, no, because then I would have to give Lee a cut of the profits.
All right.
Well, yeah, no, I don't see a companion book right now, but some of the books have maps in them, because some people have asked for maps. If you go onto the website, it's quite old now. I should re-record it, an updated version, but there is a pronunciation guide if people want to know how to pronounce Armand or Rennes-Marie or Jean-Guy.
As a matter of fact, I should have done that because I know I've been butchering gamache this whole time and saying gamache. So.
Oh no, it doesn't. Honestly, I think I'm probably I think I got that wrong, but.
I'm pretty sure you know how to pronounce his name. Okay, so there's the inevitable questions about TV or film. Anything in the works, and who would you cast as Gamache?
Oh, I wish I had someone in mind. And I watch these shows, and every now and then I Google, older actors, in their 50s and nobody jumps out. I did see, and this was a number of years ago, an Irish actor named Ciarán Hinds. He was in this little British movie called Miss Pettigrew Lives for a Day.
I love that movie.
Love that movie.
It's such a great movie, yeah.
Isn't it? It's got Amy Adams, who plays a really ditzy role, and it's got, oh my God, what's her name? I just went blank. Frances McDormand as Miss Pettigrew. And this actor I'd never seen before, but learned his name is Ciarán Hinds, had a secondary role in it, but he was wonderful. And it was a very Gamache-like role. And there was one scene where he's talking about his experience. It's set in the 1920s in London, and he's talking about all the friends he lost in the war. And it was just so moving. But he's warm and funny and strong. And I just thought, he's the one I want. And at the time he was the right age, but this was like 15 years ago. And now, unfortunately, he's not. But I'm sure there's an actor. Fate will present me with the right actor. I just hope it's not Maggie Smith.
So Marie would like to know, and I think this is the last audience question we will get to. Marie would like to know if your characters speak to you or insinuate themselves into the plots.
They certainly speak to me. I think I listen to music. I walk around a lot. When I'm in a plane, I plug music in, and I can see scenes and I can hear different dialogue between them. In many ways, it's what I hope will happen in the books, and can happen with me when I'm writing is that fourth wall comes down. So I'm observing the characters. They come alive, and that's what you really hope will happen. At the same time, I do have a certain amount of control over what they do, but I know when I've got it wrong. It's a funny thing, eh? I'm writing a scene, I thought, it's just not right. It's just not right. And I don't know what's wrong about it, but it's just not right. And so I'll keep rewriting it. And then in some ways the characters will tell me, yeah, this is the right way.
Just something that's disingenuous to the character and you don't know it yet.
Yes, exactly. And there's some things I have characters say that I realize has to be said, but maybe not by that character, or there's a different way of saying it.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So at the end of all of my interviews with authors, I like to take a moment to get to know you a little bit better. And we're just going to do one question to end on. It's my favorite question. I normally pull questions from the Proust questionnaire, which for those of you who aren't familiar with it, it was a set of questions that Marcel Proust came up with in the late 1880s to, have discussions at cocktail parties and get to know people better. But I always end with this question because I like ending with this question. So what is your idea of perfect happiness?
I would say acceptance and gratitude. If I can have both of those, then I am perfectly happy. Contentment, accepting what I have in my life now and not focusing on what I don't have. I think that's, there's elements that are important, like friendship, friends, so important. But gratitude is a big one as well.
Someone said the other day that going to bed with a calm mind. And I thought, oh, that's got to be mine. My brain is crazy town when it's time for bed. So going to bed with a calm mind does sound pretty perfect to me. But yeah, gratitude and reflection of what you have sounds lovely. So if you missed the beginning of this, I've already given the directions. You can, we'll be sending a link to the video on YouTube to all the ticket holders. We have mailed out the vast majority of books. You should be receiving those soon. I would like to thank Louise so much for her time, for her wonderful books, for taking the time out to join us today. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. You and Murder by the Book, I wouldn't be where I am without you and your support early on when nobody knew who I was and no bookstore, no library wanted me. And you guys did, and you promoted me and made me feel a part of the community and that I actually had a career in front of me. And that's huge to do that to an emerging author. And I'm so grateful to you and have such affection for Murder by the Book and for you and for Houston. So thank you. And thank you to everybody. I know people who have joined from all over the place, not just in Houston. And I'm grateful for their time and midday.
Yes, we are also, you making it easy for us because those books were wonderful. And our favorite thing to do as an independent bookstore and kind of, experts on the mystery field is to introduce people to those new authors. So now that we can look back and say that, Louise Penny has been a #1 New York Times bestseller for so many years, but we were reading her from still life. That's fun. That's a fun thing for us to do, our favorite thing to do. So That way it's...
You've got the original still, like the British.
I do. And it's a signed one. I tracked it down. I also have, I'm looking straight at it across from me. I have the American edition too, but I don't know. I love the maple leaf on that one.
So do I. No, that's the hardcover, I think. Is that the hardcover?
It is. Yeah, it's got the hardcover.
Yeah, because they didn't think that the books would do very well. So I think they had a print run of like 500. So they're actually worth something now.
It's one of my prized books in my collection. I love it.
I have to buy them now off eBay. I want them.
Well, I'm going to send you some luggage tags, but I'm not sending you that book. All right. So I would like to also thank Sarah and the team at Minotaur Books for helping out, getting all of this set up. We love working with them all the time. For those of you who have enjoyed this discussion and might want to tune in for another, we'll be talking with Sophie Hannah and Ruth Ware about the influence of British Golden Age mysteries next week. And then also we're having a Bring Your Own Tea afternoon with Anne Cleves on September 13th. So a lot of you read her books. Make sure to check those out. And again, thank you all for joining and have a wonderful afternoon. Bye, Louise.
Bye, McKenna. Thank you. Bye, John. Bye, everybody.